So this is coming to 10:40 GMT, 11:40 UK local time on Sunday the 29th of August 2021. We are continuing the KhoodeelaarTV channel dedicated to the campaign for saving Geronimo. You can see the picture of Geronimo on the top right of the screen. Geronimo's picture is with his mom, Helen MacDonald, who has been fighting for justice for Geronimo for 4 years. Now, Geronimo is an international baby. He arrived in the UK, let's say at the invitation of Helen MacDonald during 2017. And in the course of the last 4 years, which have been spent, as far as Helen and Geronimo are concerned, in a unique battle that has highlighted the drawbacks and the weaknesses and the defects built in the UK state. The UK state has been abused by the occupants of the posts concerned. And the fact that those particular occupants in the posts concerned have been allowed to abuse their occupation of the posts, which abuse has been directly felt by Helen, who has said more than once that she has felt and she is feeling that she has been tortured, emotionally tortured, mentally tortured, intellectually tortured. Although she hasn't spoken in those terms, but we are saying in context and on the basis of all the evidence that we have seen in the last, let's say during the last 4 weeks. And in the course of our solidarity with Helen and our defense of the need for justice for the baby Geronimo, we have uncovered evidence from publicly accessible sources that show that the claim by Dominic Cummings to that particular select committee of members of parliament to the fact that he, Cummings, considered Boris Johnson a very unfit person for purpose. Now that unfitness is not confined, not limited to Boris Johnson. And Boris Johnson is not the only member of the cabal. We call it cabal because of its absolutely pathetic performance. This is the front page of today's Sunday Times. Now, Sunday Times is the paper that is owned by and controlled by Rupert Murdoch, of course. Now, this is not the Sunday Times. Politically overall, this is not the Sunday Times that Harold Evans edited in the 1960s. Because in the 1960s, Harold Evans ran the campaign through the Sunday Times against the distillers company that made the drug thalidomide. The drug thalidomide then affected many women, pregnant women in the UK, whose pregnancies were, let's say, interfered with, sabotaged by the contents of the thalidomide drug that they consumed. And any number of disabled children with all kinds of physical and most likely the relevant mental deformities and handicaps were born because of the effect of the thalidomide drug sold in this country by the distillers company. Now, I'm saying this without any script. Anyone watching this must understand how it is that I remember all these names. And the answer is because I have studied all the details. This is the Sunday Times, but this is not the Sunday Times of Harry Evans. And in his campaign, essentially for the distillers company to admit liability and responsibility for the thalidomide drug and the consequence on the pregnant women and the children born. So that was the one-off. That was the one-off campaign that remains one-off to this day. I would say more than 50 years later. And I think that the behavior of the current UK government department, DEFRA, which is to do with, allegedly to do with the protection of the environment and the protection of animals. The DEFRA is featured on the front page of this Sunday Times, of course, but I'll come to that in a minute. But now this is a piece about the Afghan blame game erupting, and this is not the campaigning Sunday Times coverage about what has been happening in Afghanistan, but it is still substantial recognition of the unfitness for purpose of the Boris Johnson fronted cabal. Now, Afghan blame game erupts is followed by two subheadings. One is that anger at Dominic Raab over thousands left in Kabul, and the other is the British soldiers fly home at end of 20-year mission. Now, in the body of the copy on that, on the front page, in column 2, there is one paragraph referring to pen farthing. And it says, and I'll read the whole paragraph. for accessibility by anyone watching this and wanting to understand what the contextual reference to the animals is. Pen Farding, who left Kabul last night with 168 dogs and cats, threatened an aide to Ben Wallace, the defense secretary, that he would, FING, destroy that particular aide to Wallace unless Farding's animals were rescued. Now, Farding, says the Sunday Times, which is in doing what it is about, what I am about to read, is proving there's a stooge service of the regime. Now, Penny Fardin has been dubbed, that is named, the pet dick in Whitehall. Now, that word dick is of various uses, but in this particular kind of reference and use, they're referring to him as an idiot. Now, he's far from the idiot. He's not behaved as an idiot. It's the government. Wally the Wallace has behaved idiotically. And when the Sunday Times, which then becomes the Sunday Crimes, repeats Whitehall's abuse and insult to Penny Farding, it is behaving in the same way that Fleet Street and the Sunday Times have been behaving against Geronimo and against Helen MacDonald. Because what they've been doing is repeating packaged lies on behalf of the government. They're not investigating. They're not investigating and they're not asking questions about these very serious issues. What is the serious issue? The serious issue, of course, is the thousands of people that have been left behind by the British, who have completed their last rescue kind of mission. And this is we'll go back to that one because this is the fuller report on Penny Farding by the Sunday Crimes, because they give the whole heading to that alleged threat. And why would a British soldier, ex-British soldier, use any such threat? Because he had to. Why? Because if he didn't issue that kind of threat in the context, we are not justifying that, but we are explaining it. These people who were blocking the rescue of the limited number of cats and dogs would have blocked all the animals from being, any of the animals being rescued from Afghanistan. So what does it mean? It means that the government is not functioning, what Dominic Cummings said. And what our analysis of the UK state, the Khoodeelaar campaign's analysis, over the last decades of the movement defending the community in the East End of London over the last 6 decades, is that the UK state is dysfunctional for the UK people. The people that it does recognize, the state recognize as being people legitimately belonging to the communities, to quote society. Currently, and since 2010, that is 11 years. 11 years and a few months. The political color of the government in this country has been conservative. And the conservatives who have been in power are the conservatives of the kind of conservatives who lean to the right in the sense of Margaret Thatcher. And her ideology and her plan and her agenda. Now, Thatcher, I met at least one fan of Thatcher's, a close fan of Thatcher's, Alan Clark. And I met him in Chancery Lane, or in the corner of Chancery Lane and the Strand. And it was a short meeting. And the main topic was the cat. The main cat that was resident in Downing Street, but who was murdered by most informed observers kind of accounts. And one of the informed observers was, of course, Alan Clark, whose piece I had read in a newspaper column or a newspaper report about the murdered cat. And he said, Alan Clark, when he kind of spoke to me in response to my question about the authenticity of the source or the sources on which he had based the claim that the cat had been murdered. He did this. And that meant that Blair, that was Blair's kind of time. The Blair had allowed the cat to be murdered. That is what Alan Clark said. And the reason why Blair had allowed the cat to be murdered was because Blair's wife, Sherry Booth, wanted the cat out of Downing Street because she didn't like the cat, or she didn't like cats. So that's Alan Clark that I spoke to. And Alan Clark was one of the very few persons that didn't behave. When I approached him on site, he didn't behave as a racist. Amazingly, in contrast to the likes of Paul Foot. Paul Foot was a notorious socialist, but he was a racist. Whereas Alan Clark, a notorious right-winger, didn't behave with me in any way as a racist trying to get away. Whereas Paul Foot, not far from where I spoke to Alan Clark, had done that few years previously. Irony of British left and right politics is not confined to the comparison between Paul Foot and Alan Clark either. The irony comes back to what we have been talking about, Charlie Faulkner. Charlie Faulkner is the one who is quoted on page 23 of the Times of Saturday, 28th of August. On the right-hand side, he is reported, Charlie Faulkner, as follows by the Jonathan Amis, legal editor. The participation by the current president of the Supreme Court, England, UK, triggered renewed criticism from Labour. Lord Faulkner of Thoroton and it says QC. Now, Faulkner probably wasn't a barrister before, but he was manipulated into, or he manipulated his way into a QC tag. So Faulkner of Thoroton, QC, the shadow attorney general, said that Reid, that is the president of the UK Supreme Court, and Hodge should not have agreed to sit on the Hong Kong bench. Who is Hogg? It's not Hogg, it's Hodge. Reid and Hodge, the deputy president of the Supreme Court, sit as overseas judges on Hong Kong's final Court of Appeal, the highest bench. They are part of a group of 8 senior British judges who sit part-time on the Hong Kong court. Critics have said that their continued presence gives legitimacy to China's crackdown on democracy in the territory. Now, what the reference to Charlie Faulkner does is to politicize at more than one level the role of the courts, either in Hong Kong or in the UK, or the role of the judges, role of the members of the judges, members of the judiciary rather. The politicize gives it the political distortion. Why is that important? Because although there is no written constitution in the UK, there is a doctrine of separation of powers that separates the executive, which is the government, from the judiciary, that is this so-called doctrine of separation of powers between the executive and the judiciary. And the judiciary, according to that doctrine of separation of powers, is not supposed to be, the judiciary is not supposed to be an agent of the executive. It is essentially supposed to exist to interpret the law and to interpret the law independently of the executive. Now, this analysis that I'm presenting is not available in any of the university practices, forums, as far as I know, and as far as can be accessed. And I'm doing that directly as part of the diagnosis, world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. Now, the Fleet Street newspapers, including or typified by, in this context, typified by the Rupert Murdoch Sunday Times, as different from the Harry Evans edited Sunday Times of the 1960s. They are not, these newspapers, they are not upholding that doctrine of separation of powers. They're not even recognizing. I'm pointing this out, but they are not. And in staying completely silent on the doctrine, these papers are allowing the Boris Johnson-fronted cabal to aggravate the abuse of the state. For example, this campaign that we are supporting, the KhoodeelaarTV campaign, supporting the campaign for justice for GERONIMO. This campaign is pointing out factual behavior by the 3 judges. In sequence, the names are Murray, Griffiths, and Stacey. Murray and Griffiths are 2 men, and Stacey is a woman. despite the fact that she has been put in that post to enhance the representation of women, create the diversity, gender balance in the judiciary. Stacey has behaved as corruptly, as prejudicially, as ignorantly as the two men that preceded her in their roles as rubber stamps for the DEFRA corrupt department fronted by George Useless Eustace. Now, I'm not swearing at Eustace, but I could have done, because the strength of moral justification and ethical outrage and intellectual outrage against the stupid behavior of government ministers is so strong. For example, the British actor and comedian Ricky Gervais or Jarvis has actually sworn in his tweet, "Dear stupid," and there are these there is the four-letter word. He was commenting on the utterance by Ben Wallace, the defense secretary so-called, who made the stupid remark that he wasn't going to prioritize animals over people. So Ricky Gervais or Jarvis is the one that previously let rip against the same person or persons before Penn Farthing had to threaten them, according to this particular piece in the Sunday Times on page 5, trail on page 1, and detailed on page 5. Now, what these two cases, let's say, confirm is that the British government, the UK regime fronted by Boris Johnson, is failing the people in Britain. Remnant of society that Thatcher denied the existence of society. No such thing as society, she said, boastfully. But of course there is a thing called society. The minute society crumbles, there will be no Conservative Party. There will be no government. There will be really. The last thing that Thatcher or the right-wingers following her would want, there really would be anarchy. And if anarchy comes anywhere near resembling any scenario associated with revolution like happened in France 200 years ago, then among the main targets of the revenge would be the Conservatives, if they could be found outside of hiding places. So the idiocy of the Conservatives denying society must be abandoned for their own sakes. Because if they attack society, in the way they have been doing, then logically it will end with the end of society and the end of them, logically. Now, the Murdoch newspapers and the other DEFRA supporting media outlets and right-wing outlets in the USA and in the UK are following the line against Geronimo based on the de facto assertion that there is no such thing as society and there is no such thing as compassion and there is no such thing as innocence. Innocence by the innocent. So what the conservative so-called government fronted by Boris Johnson are doing, they're behaving like the personification of evil. Many people claim there is no such thing as evil because they say that to recognize the existence of evil would be to also recognize the moral obligations and to society. So they're selfish and they're shallow and they're stupid when they say that there is no such thing as evil. There is no such thing as immorality. Now, these people are deluded, the real deluded ones. For example, the whole of the last week, Fleet Street has contained huge news items, so-called. And these are all based on the lack of compassion. Because they say that the stampede to escape Kabul following the arrival of the Taliban is to do with the Taliban's lack of compassion, the Taliban's lack of justice, Taliban's lack of the rule of law. Now, in his kind of role as Starmer's Attorney General, that is, Shadow Attorney General, Charlie Faulkner, whose record is that of a colluder with a convicted, that is to say, proven liar. I mean, his biography includes reference to the fact that he shared a flat with Tony Blair before Blair became or came anywhere near the post of leadership of the Labour Party. Faulkner is not just one that once shared a flat with Blair. He is also one that was included in Blair's cabinet or cabinets, and Faulkner shamelessly lied in support of Blair's roles and agenda and work. Faulkner didn't oppose the collusion with the massacre in Afghanistan or in Iraq that Blair took part in, along with George W. Bush. So Faulkner is not somebody that has got any real claim to morality in office. So for him to be quoted in the Times yesterday as being concerned about the absence in the Chinese side of things legally, absence of the rule of law. Remember the phrase, rule of law? It's the very thing that I have been emphasizing about the role of the three judges. Murray Griffiths, and Stacey. Because all three of them, whether considered separately or individually on their bogus, hocus pocus judgments against Geronimo and Helen MacDonald, all three of these judges are guilty of complicity with DEFRA's criminality. And their complicity is the most brazen example of intentionally violating the rule of law. Now, rule of law is not a kind of joke part of a conversation or a chat. Rule of law is the foundation. Whenever ordinary people talk about the law, about the court, or when the references are made to the role and the existence of a court of law or a judiciary, what people perceive, they may not give expression in words to the perception, but what they actually perceive, what they instinctively feel about the role of a independent court of law or independent judge or independent members of the judiciary is, in other words, called the rule of law, because they expect the ordinary person's perception of a court of law and a judge or a number of judges or the collective judiciary is what is expressed in the two-word phrase rule of law. And the process that people associate with the delivery, with the upholding, with the adherence to that rule of law by the judges and the courts, that process that they go through to reach, before reaching the conclusion, is called a due process. So therefore, the due process and the rule of law are centrally the expression of what ordinary people, innocent people in good faith, consider to be the role of the courts and the role of the judges. And yet the Fleet Street newspapers have been lying in the court's denial of the rule of law against Geronimo, against Helen MacDonald. Now, anyone watching this one may think that, well, it's known. It's not known. I'm making it known. It's not known because none of the reports in the Fleet Street papers or in the mainstream so-called news outlets or broadcasting counterparts has referred to the rule of law, has referred to the due process, referred to the absence of the rule of law, the avoidance of due process by these judges. So I'm making it known. And the reason I'm making it known is exactly the reason that Charlie Faulkner and the others criticizing the president of the Supreme Court of doing, that is to say, violating and breaching rule of law, due process. And I don't know the actual text. I haven't seen the transcripts. As opposed to key facts, I have not seen the actual transcripts of any of the three judges and the rulings, because it has not been published as far as I can see, except the one that I have seen that was made by Murray. And the list of DEFRA's failures, the list of DEFRA's lies and the defects, the list that was submitted to the hearing that Murray conducted or chaired, the list of defects and the lies and falsehoods of the DEFRA kind of side against Geronimo, against Helen MacDonald. The list is quite long. And although there are items, each of the allegations against DEFRA is stated to be addressed by DEFRA on the right-hand side of the ruling that Murray published or issued. The DEFRA stance on each one falls down on the kind of credibility, substance, evidential kind of criteria. There is a statement made, but that statement falls down. It doesn't actually meet the criteria necessary to show that DEFRA has done the right thing, that DEFRA has behaved honestly, that DEFRA has done the duties and has followed the rule of law. DEFRA hasn't. Now, anyone who wants to know more about the rule of law and the due process, they can look up and they will find, of course, both entries in Wikipedia and generally other kind of statements and definitions. Think about that. So if you look up due process, and if you look up rule of law, you will find common grounds between the two, because the rule of law is reached by due process, let's say, or rule of law is delivered by following due process. So they're very closely connected, and you cannot have one without the other. Now, these are international concepts, not confined to just the British judiciary. Most international jurisdictions, legal jurisdiction, judicial jurisdictions, recognize the requirements of rule of law and the due process. Why? Because without due process and rule of law, no legal system, judicial system, can do the job that it's supposed to do. Now, if a particular jurisdiction, if a particular group of judges transparently fail to adhere to the rule of law and the due process, then the public's necessary confidence in the judiciary falls. And where does it exist, this kind of absence of what is understood by due process and rule of law? Where? In the case of Charlie Faulkner yesterday in the Times, in places like China, and in the historic kind of words of American President Ronald Reagan in Iran and North Korea. I mean, I remember watching Ronald Reagan use his speech, and he called them Looney Tunes. North America and Iran he called Looney Tunes. Now, this is just a reference to the strength of the assumption that due process and rule of law must prevail and must be seen to be being adhered to by those who occupy the positions in the judiciary, like Murray, like Griffiths, like Stacey. So what this DEFRA denials and DEFRA lies is showing on the basis of its DEFRA's attacks on Geronimo and attacks on Helen MacDonald is that the UK is like North Korea of Ronald Reagan's description, of like Iran of Ronald Reagan's description. Remember what I'm saying, Ronald Reagan's description. I have no particular evidence about North Korea or Iran. I don't have to. I am concerned about Britain and about the British judiciary behaving like states as described by Ronald Reagan as Looney Tunes of North Korea or Iran. Is that what Dominic Lawson wants? Because Lawson, whose name I have changed and I have been calling him Lie's son. Lawson says that people who care about due process, people who care about rule of law, people who care about the judiciary behaving as a separate organ of the state are deluded. So what Dominic Lawson is saying, in other words, is that Ronald Reagan was wrong. The very opposite of what Dominic Lawson would claim to be. What Dominic Lawson is saying is that the Taliban are to be lauded for their attacks and their threats and their lack of any recognition for the rule of law and the due process. That's what Dominic Lawson is saying. And Dominic Lawson is saying that the victims of the Taliban deserve it, ask for it, because they were deluded. They were deluded to expect fair treatment, to expect due process, expect rule of law. That's what Dominic Lawson is saying when he's supporting the random, murderous errand that DEFRA has been pursuing against the innocent 8-year-old Geronimo for 4 years. So DEFRA targeted Geronimo when he was aged 4 years. Would Dominic Lawson support that? Let's say there is like DEFRA targeting this child, this infant. The Taliban have threatened this angel of Kabul. So like DEFRA targeted Geronimo. So going by his logic, Dominic Lawson would not accept this as a child, as the angel of Kabul. Dominic Lawson would say that this child deserves to be murdered or destroyed. So that's what we are doing. World exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. What right, what evidence, what knowledge has Dominic Lawson to condemn Geronimo? Condemn Geronimo in the way that he has done by not just condemning Geronimo, but by condemning everyone who supports justice for Geronimo and condemning people as deluded, people he doesn't know. Now, can Dominic Lawson have the intellectual and moral courage to debate why he should not be put down? Because on the evidence of his criminality, he is not fit for purpose. He is not fit to live. He may say he is innocent. He may say he is free from any disease that he can spread and infect others with. But going by his own kind of criteria, he should be condemned to be killed because he is innocent, according to his claim, of course, and because he is in good health or normal health. Being innocent and being healthy are two of the deadly crimes in Boris Johnson's Britain. If the threat to pen farthings just arrived, let's say by now, let's say that they've arrived by now. The time now is after, what time is it now? So we haven't checked the kind of updates. It's 11:30 GMT and 12:30 local time. So let's say that his animals have arrived already. Let's see what the internet is recording about pen farthing. Whether they have arrived, these animals. So this tweet has been posted 49 minutes ago, and it says, all the Nowzad is a place, I think, in Kabul, animals came home safely thanks to the bravery and dedication of this man. Pen Farthing is a national hero, and no muckraking by the Ministry of Defense ministers and special advisors will change that. So that's the confirmation in a tweet. But this claim that all the animals is yet to be verified, because all the previous reports have said that not all of his animals were allowed, and also that the people who looked after them were denied rescue. So this is what the Sunday Times is saying. Let's see again what it is saying. See, so this piece says on the front page of the Sunday Times, the Foreign Office failed to roll the pitch with these countries for months, a minister said. The Prime Minister wanted third countries involved, and RAB did nothing. Boris is exasperated that the Foreign Office has not done what he told them. They also took their people out, and that cost us several days. I suspect we could have taken 800 to 1,000 more if they had not done that. And they said last night a senior official in the Pakistani government said RAB had shown no interest in talking to them, claiming that he did not make a single phone call to the Afghan or the Pakistani foreign ministries in the 6 months before the crisis. Remember, 6 months. He thought Afghanistan was yesterday's war, and the government was totally focused on Brexit. And the Foreign Office's response to that is a lie, because it said, the Foreign Office said RAB had spoken twice to the Pakistani Foreign Minister, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, on this 22nd of August. How dare the liars! 22nd of August is 6 months later. And during the height of the crisis, the morons. So what we have to say is that you look at any of the ministries that together supposedly form the government fronted by Boris Johnson. Remember, this is the headline. Boris Johnson is blaming Dominic Raab, and Dominic Raab is denying, and this is only the tip of the iceberg. Ben Wallace, Dominic Raab, Grant Shapps, and of course, George Useless Eustace. These are 4 of the ministers in the 4 ministries that form part of the Johnson cabal, and they're all dysfunctional. How damaging and dangerous is it? In so-called peacetime, this is the worst kind of behavior, because George Useless Eustace is getting away with mass murdering innocent animals. And going by the silence of Charlie Faulkner, about the lack of due process and rule of law at home, it is factually asserted, and we do assert, and I do assert, that Faulkner is doing Keir Starmer's bidding in playing the complicit role against China, but playing the complicit role for DEFRA by maintaining silence at home. Because if rule of law and due process matter, as Faulkner is reportedly claiming about Hong Kong and the role of the not just the current president of the Supreme Court called Reed, but also the first president of the Supreme Court, which is David Neuberger, who is there as well. Neuberger is part of the British judicial participants in what the Times is saying that in the stooging role they're playing for Beijing. So the list of the judicial numbers, here is the list of the judicial numbers. Okay. Reed acknowledged that the role of the UK judges on the court, who include the former Supreme Court presidents, Lord Phillips of Worth Matt Travers and Lord Neuberger of Abbotsbury, remains under scrutiny. Reed said that he had been closely monitoring and pressing developments in Hong Kong and discussed the situation with the Foreign Secretary and Lord Chancellor. Now, let's put it this way. The doctrine of separation of powers means that members of the judiciary, such as this particular individual Reed, incumbent in the post of the President of the Supreme Court currently, that the role should be played independently of the executive. And yet he is admitting here in this report that he has been in regular contact with the government, the executive in this country. So we submit, as they say, that the three judges, Murray, Griffiths, and Stacey, failed to behave as judges, that they became converted to agents and stooges of the murderous errand wanted by DEFRA and Eustace. And before Eustace was incumbent, by Gove, and that these three should be prosecuted as criminals, conspiring or co-conspiring with DEFRA against a perfectly innocent and healthy Geronimo, and violating the rights of Helen MacDonald and defaming her. So these three should be prosecuted and sued in defamation. Of course, I'm speaking as a campaigning constitutional law rights advocate, but this is possible. The other thing is that none of the Fleet Street coverage refers to the UK's currently active obligations as part of the UK's obligations and duties as a currently active signatory to literally hundreds of international treaties, international conventions, international agreements, international charters. Well, these international treaties, anyone watching this program or over the last year or so will know, these are at the center of our diagnostic findings against Fleet Street. So, what we are talking about is the active collusion by the judges, Murray, Griffiths, and Stacey, with the murderous errands against Geronimo. Now, who said about Geronimo that DEFRA had been doing the murderous errands? That phrase is, the full phrase is, that phrase is actually, in this context of defending Geronimo, that phrase is attributed to a man called Stanley Johnson. Stanley Johnson, of course, is the biological father of Boris Johnson. And Stanley Johnson published a piece in the Sun newspaper which claimed that Stanley Johnson was their wildlife reporter. Well, that is the piece that he wrote about DEFRA doing the random murders errand against Geronimo, was the only one that made the national kind of news headlines or headings. And since that time, Stanley Johnson has not followed up, in public at least, that particular stance he took in condemning DEFRA and its murderous attempt errand against the innocent Geronimo. So we shall be talking more about all of that and following up on other aspects of the campaign to protect Geronimo. And my view is that Geronimo is healthy, has been healthy for the last 4 years. So he doesn't need to be tested at all. He's a healthy boy. Leave him alone. No need to subject him to another test. Because DEFRA doesn't want to test for a different reason. And we don't want Geronimo to be tested. We want to defend him as a healthy boy who should be left alone for good immediately. The other aspect is that Carrie Simmons was reported last weekend as having played a part in changing the defense minister Ben Wally Wallace and his hostility to Pan Farthing's animals. We said to Carrie Simmons here, whoever sees this and passes it on to her, that if she is genuinely concerned about the welfare of animals, there is no more urgent case that she can support than the case against DEFRA and the case for Geronimo to be left alone. Geronimo doesn't need any test, and Geronimo doesn't need to be harassed throughout his life with this bogus hocus pocus interference with his life. He's a healthy boy. Leave him alone.